Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Pamela Nolan Young. I'm the Director of Academic Diversity and Inclusion. For today's third session in the forum, COVID-19, What Comes Next? As we all know, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, one that has had a disparate impact on African American, Latinx, and rural communities. In the prior sessions, you've had the opportunity to hear Notre Dame faculty address the importance of the support of women's health and the use of public health and engineering tools to understand how COVID-19 impacts our community. I'll be your moderator for this third session on learning, understanding how students and others use remote experiences to create community and develop a response to COVID-19 grounded in ethics and social justice. I have the pleasure of introducing you to two of my colleagues from the Center for Social Concern. The center puts Catholic social tradition to practice through community-engaged research, teaching and learning, which brings students, faculty, and community partners together for personal and social transformation. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge our partners and provide some housekeeping information. Thank you to Notre Dame Research, the Health and Wellbeing Initiative, to the Notre Dame Office of Clinical Partnerships, and the Social Determinants of Wellbeing Taskforce for convening and supporting this community-focused research forum. Each of our panelists will have approximately 20 minutes to share their research, followed by Q&A at the end. Please type your questions to everyone in the chat. And as you've heard in prior sessions, if we're not able to get to all of the questions, we'll record them and share them with our panelists. First, we'll hear from Ben Wilson, the Director of Summer Service Learning Program at the Center. Ben is going to address learning solidarity in a remote context. Following Ben, we'll hear from Jay Brandenberger, Associate Director of the Center, Director of the Assessment and Engaged Scholarship, and Director of Academic Community Engagement. Jay and two of his students will address student and community moral ethical development in response to COVID-19 and the racial justice. Ben, normally 250 students are placed with community partners to provide service to marginalized communities. Obviously, COVID-19 prohibited travel and direct in-person service. Would you tell us how you reimagined the Summer Service Learning Program?
Thanks so much, Pamela. Yeah, it's great question. I'll be happy to share about that in the talk. It was certainly a scramble, and we're grateful for so much great support as we did so. Did you want me to respond to that in this moment, or just to go ahead and start?
No, please just go ahead and start.
Great, perfect. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Hope everyone can see that okay. Okay. Well, great. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Pam. As Pamela said, my name is Ben Wilson. I'll just share a bit about my experience this past summer working with the program, but it's less to highlight one specific program and more to draw some anecdotal evidence from this group of students to think more broadly about this moment that we're in. For me personally, from early on in the pandemic, one of the principal questions that I've had is, what effect might social distancing have longer term on how we relate to each other? Might we recover a deeper sense of community, or will we drift still further apart? This morning, I want to share a bright spot in a year marked by so much bad news. I will point to evidence from a group of students who I believe are growing in rather than losing a sense of solidarity. And as the so-called adult world seems to fracture further into ideologically divided camps of us and them, it's perhaps never been more important and more timely for us as educators to learn from our students. So as Pamela said, my role at the university is the director of the Summer Service Learning Program at the Center for Social Concerns. So the Summer Service Learning Program, or the SSLP as we call it, it's a 3-credit theology course in which students spend 8 weeks doing direct service, living and working among communities on the margins of American society. And I think that these students offer a profound witness for us in these times. Most falls in a typical year, which of course this year has not been, students, when they come back after these summers, overwhelmingly express a common shared insight, something to the effect of, I have so much more in common than I realized with people who I previously thought as different from me. I realize that this sounds like bumper sticker cliche potentially, but remember that the folks saying this in many cases are, 19-year-olds from suburban households describing how they felt after living and sharing meals in a homeless shelter, or highly driven first-gen college students commenting about what they lived or what they learned from living in a group home for adults with physical and mental disabilities who've never held a GPA. In other words, students frequently develop what the Catholic social tradition describes as solidarity. Here's how two past students put it in their own words. One said, "The most important lesson I learned was that the best way to stand in solidarity with people in need is just to be a constant presence in their lives, not just giving quick fixes to their problems." Another student said, "Solidarity means living what others live, experiencing it with them. I can talk to anyone now. I'm helping others in band camp now." I love how practical this example is, which I didn't used to do. "I'm more myself with others." That's also solidarity. This short statement covers a lot of ground here very quickly. So that's what students in 2019 learned after living under the same roof and sharing meals with people. But what about now? We need solidarity now more than ever, I believe, but it's even possible to learn solidarity in an era when social distancing and so many of our interactions are virtual. So this past summer, when the SSLP in its traditional format was canceled, our program pivoted quickly to connect 109 students with 50 different nonprofit organizations to work remotely on various service projects. Our partner organizations quickly realized that smart, technologically savvy college students could be a really important asset for them. As frontline social service workers faced tremendous strains on their time and resources last summer, they were able to lean on students to perform vital behind-the-scenes work or to advance projects that they'd been deferring for years. As probably many of us know, Notre Dame students are accomplished accomplishers. It came as little surprise then when we heard back from these service agencies that they spoke really highly of what students were capable of doing. But would the experience change students? Anything about who they are? Would they learn solidarity? So I want to share just two examples from this past summer. An aspiring doctor from Kentucky, rural Kentucky, Jonathan Hockey, was paired with Catholic Charities in Dallas as a caseworker, vetting applications for financial assistance during the depth of the unemployment crisis. He'd review bank statements and check stubs and piles of forms, all represented via pixels on his computer screen. Then it hit him one day while he was reviewing applications that all the headlines he was reading in the national news about the CARES Act wasn't just some automatic let it be said, let it be done decree. He realized and he saw himself as one person in the very human chain, talking with and listening to real people, connecting them with the support that they desperately needed. And that this work wouldn't happen without him and colleagues like him. For Jonathan, the paperwork he was reviewing then wasn't just data. It was an expression of someone's story, someone very much like his own father, his own uncle, he could easily recognize in the people he talked with. Another student, Alyssa, described a very concrete step that she took this summer that helped her to grow in solidarity. Alyssa attended a rally in memory of George Floyd, where she heard a white mayor speak at the event. The mayor recounted how he had texted some Black leaders in the community shortly after the news of George Floyd's death. And he wrote this. He said, "I'm so sorry. I cannot imagine what you're going through right now." One of the leaders, one of his friends on the text chain responded, "You have to imagine. That's the only way you can begin to understand what Black people in America live through on a daily basis." So the mayor at the rally shared this text exchange with the group, with the crowd present, and he invited the crowd to lay in the grass for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and to do precisely what his friend had challenged him to do, to imagine the reality of being Black in America. Alyssa took this mental exercise to heart, carrying it back with her to her own work this summer, creating resources for clients of a family law clinic, many of whom are low-income single parents who'd been laid off during the pandemic. In a course assignment, Alyssa wrote, "Imagining what it would feel like to care for children in this context of incredibly stressful situation was really hard for me, but I tried my best. I believe that imagining not only helped me completing my work for this week, but also allowed me to grow in solidarity with my clients that the site serves. So during a strange time when so many of us have, some of us and our students have had both the burden and the luxury of being shut inside a self-enclosed bubble, Jonathan and Alyssa developed the discipline of seeing past their own literal and metaphorical walls, beyond their immediate experiences. Students over and over again said this summer how their work with their service organization transformed a time of social isolation into a time of surprisingly profound social connection for themselves and sometimes too for the people that they worked with. As one member of our SSLP team summed it up, she said, "Students in 2020 speak about things like the value of communal meals, the impact of reporting back to their family and friends about their work in the program. Very simple, mundane acts, which were rare in previous students, but still show a sense of solidarity in trying to understand and raise awareness for those they served. Students also showed a greater appreciation for those who constantly serve, but might frequently go unnoticed." So myself as an educator, my own assessment is that this past summer was anything but a remedial learning experience for learning solidarity. Students, I believe, really learned real solidarity, even while interacting remotely with others. And in the process, they challenge us to forge new pathways for growth. So with these stories in mind, I want to revisit the question I started with. How might the experience of social distancing affect our ability to empathize with each other longer term? What can we as professionals from a variety of different diverse fields learn from Jonathan and Alyssa's example? I want to share three ideas. So the first is to pay attention. MIT sociologist and clinical psychologist Sherry Turkle has written extensively on technology and empathy. She points out that technology in itself is neutral. How we use it is up to us. As we all know, technology can be an endless source of distraction and an unfortunate source of division. But Jonathan and Alyssa show us what can be possible when we instead use technology to build our moral concentration, to notice the small things, to look beyond ourselves, and to imagine the situation of others. Secondly, to connect the what and the why. I'd guess that many of us have been mired over the past 9 months in spreadsheets and contingency planning and Zoom meetings, and it can be really easy to lose sight of the why in our work. But my students this past summer remind me that the why is ultimately about the who. Who will benefit from the work we're doing? Or who won't? And what can we do about that? Solidarity is not just a feeling or a gesture. The Catholic social tradition treats solidarity as a way of being. It's a spirituality. It's a sacred recognition of how my life is interconnected with yours that begins with a belief in God's own solidarity with us, that God so loved the world that God became human. The name Emmanuel means God with us. Third, change isn't instant nor Instagrammable. I think a lot of students in service want to see their work and see it take immediate result. Students this summer were honest in struggling to develop patience and humility, working behind the scenes often case. One student, I love this, she said, this summer didn't really produce anything for me to post on social media, and that's a good thing. So the challenge for us then is how can we use this time to maybe think less about individual achievements and more about the integral place that each of us has in community. I just want to conclude then by sharing one kind of extended quotation from Pope Francis in his recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which means all our brothers and sisters. So it's a perfect source of reflection on solidarity. He writes, "Solidarity means so much more than engaging in sporadic acts of generosity. It means thinking and acting in terms of community. It means that the lives of all are prior to the appropriation of goods by a few. It also means combating the structural causes of poverty, inequality, the lack of work, land and housing, the denial of social and labor rights. Solidarity, understood in its most profound meaning, is a way of making history." So what have we learned during COVID-19 and what comes next? If we learn from these students, I believe then that we are in the slow, good, and hard process of forging a new history. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. That was wonderful to hear about the stories of your students and what they took away from those experiences. as we were all experiencing social isolation, they were able to really make connections, deep connections that were transformative. And that's a perfect sort of lead in to our next panelist, Jay. So Jay, this fall you offered a course that was titled Moral Learning and Racial Justice in the Time of Coronavirus. Would you take the time to introduce us to your students and tell us what your findings were from this course?
I sure will. Thank you, Pamela. And thank you, Ben, and excellent work that you're doing to keep Notre Dame's spirit of engagement alive during COVID. I was a summer service learning participant just a few years ago in Boston as a Notre Dame junior. It had a small impact on my life journey. In case Zoom does not convey it, that was an understatement. So good morning, all. It's great to be with you. So many good people here. I'm joined today by two creative Notre Dame students, Claudia Linzer and Caroline Fish, who will share more later and introduce themselves. This session will explore what we are learning in the moral and ethical domain from COVID-19 and racial justice concerns. I have a role as a faculty member at the Center for Social Concerns and other fun roles at Notre Dame. And I've been here 29 years, so I think I'm getting used to the place. I'm getting a sense of Notre Dame. This is what I have in mind. I will do this quickly to share more time for student colleagues and for discussion. I've developed a sort of 2-page summary of the session, so if you want further resources, etc., please let me know. So as Zora Hurston observed, there are years that ask questions and years that answer. And 2020 has presented many questions, and we're still all looking for answers. Here's a brief query, not formal research, that I posted to colleagues at a national meeting of the Association for Moral Education about 2020. The consensus: this is a year we learn not to take anything for granted. This is a stunningly teachable moment. If you take anything away from what I say, this is my key message. All we need to do is consider the shared responsibility emphasized in Notre Dame's Here campaign, or muse over the headline in The Observer that made national attention. Pope Francis has described this as a salient moment to see of the poor and vulnerable. And Science magazine echoed his remarks and called for worldwide collaboration. So as a psychologist and educator, I've been asking since March, what are we learning morally and what should we be teaching? To paraphrase Socrates, not I, but the virus teaches. So many ethical questions arise. For instance, are moral views about democracy, the protection of human life, solidarity, and the common good changing? What should a syllabus look like now? In an attempt to keep pace with the explosion of thinking and writing that started in March, I've developed a rather extensive database of emergent works across these categories. A significant number of these works identify the impact of social inequalities or suggest the importance of social determinants in health outcomes. I'm happy to share this database with you. So with much to process, I set out, as many faculty members do, to offer a course so I could learn. I entitled the course Moral Learning and Racial Justice in the Time of Coronavirus. And I was fortunate to gather a group of diverse and curious and critical and big-hearted students. I had decided only to include about 500 of the readings from the database. I kept adding things to the syllabus, and the students would ask, is that optional? And I'd say, yeah. We wrestled with many topics, questions about mental health and resilience, about racial and economic disparities illuminated by COVID-19, We explored research on empathy and justice, and we tried to take a future perspective. How will individuals and social systems change moving forward? At times, we wished for some easy answers, like this new product advertised on Saturday Night Live, 5-hour empathy for when you just don't get it. The class and I enjoyed some conjecture on this. Who would buy it? And who might want it to be a controlled substance? We also considered how universities now and in the future can best respond. And universities have responded well in many ways, both to keep their campuses safe and to contribute during the pandemic, as we heard this morning from many other participants. Ira Harkavy of the University of Pennsylvania, who spoke at Notre Dame a year ago, argues that universities can and should play a salient role to contribute and must help shape the post-COVID world through social solidarity, building a culture of democracy, and educating for the common good. So 2 projects emerged from our course. It was no accident that I had many willing students ready to contribute. In the first project, 3 students and I began collecting stories under the heading, "What has 2020 taught you?" This is not a research study, but a journalistic collection with a focus on moral learning. We shared this with a cross-section of Notre Dame folks. Here is the introduction, and here are some brief prompts, very open-ended, to get as much out from the participants. Please welcome Caroline Fish, a Notre Dame senior psychology major from Boston, who was one of the student leaders in this work. Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Caroline Fish. Thank you very much, Dr. Brandenberger. I was very fortunate to take this class, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of my colleagues who also took this class. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about this slide and also what my hope is for this project. So in class, I really began to discern the importance of community reflection and deepening our human connection to morally learn and grow. I learned that we all have struggled in our own individual ways, and sharing these experiences brings a sense of solidarity and greater compassion for humanity. And we did this on all of our class meetings on a weekly basis, and it really helped me learn and grow. My hope for this project is to expand our ability and to solve the problems while also understanding them. And that is just what we did. I believe that this will serve the Notre Dame family today and in the future. This slide illustrates a word cloud that I created, which represents the words that were shared by our community members to label their experiences and reflections on the past and present. And as you can see, hopeful, resilient, and many positive statements were made, which has taught me and my classmates that there is definitely a hopeful future ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline, and certainly feel free to come in further. We also, as we noted, collected some stories, and here are some excerpts from a few of the responses. I will just read the last one. This year has reminded me how interconnected and interdependent we are as a campus, as a country, as a global community. It has reminded me of the tremendous faith we put in others. All of the responses, I think the students will agree with me, were rich and morally nuanced. And Caroline is suggesting that we do some archiving, perhaps a time capsule, which I think is a great idea. How will we look back on this time? There was moral content in all of the stories, and also a great deal of pain, as we referenced, and moral motivation to contribute. And I think the learning is still emergent and fluid. Let me introduce Claudia Linzer, a junior at Notre Dame from South Bend, yay. And Claudia is a neuroscience major who led the second project. Claudia.
Hey, thank you for having me. So over this past semester, as we learned about different vulnerable populations that were affected by the virus, I constantly had the South Bend community in the back of my mind, being a South Bend local myself. And I think lots of students really experienced feeling isolated from the South Bend community because of the restrictions. And I particularly felt that not being able to see my family or really hear about what was happening in the community. So for our final project, a group of classmates and I interviewed a bunch of different organizations around the community, and we were able to really figure out not only the hardships that they faced, but also ask for unexpected blessings and unforeseen ways that they created creative solutions to the challenges that COVID-19 posed. So I had the pleasure of being able to interview Lisa Anderson, who helped found the Clubhouse of St. Joseph County here in South Bend. And being able to speak with Lisa was really inspiring for me. I got to hear about one project which she helped start, which is called the Our Stories Project. She helped lead it with a couple of Notre Dame students who really created it. And this involved partnering Notre Dame students with Clubhouse members. And these Clubhouse members are people suffering from chronic mental illness. And so the Notre Dame students were able to help write their stories and their memoirs over Zoom. So I just thought that was truly very creative and very inspiring. And I also really have been interested in the mental health aspect of the virus. So being able to talk to Lisa about how individuals have really been affected in our community and how she's been trying to serve them really gave me hope and a lot of food for thought as I continue thinking about how I want to respond to the virus. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Claudia, and thanks to Lisa and some other community partners who are also with us on the Zoom today. Thank you very much. And I wish we had a lot more time to talk about the course. In fact, about the projects within the course. Here are a few takeaways from the course overall. And the students really did want to engage in the moral content as well as the social factors mitigating impacts. They were very sensitive to that. And we could have talked for hours most of the time. Sometimes there was a heaviness, and I think that's also germane to the moment, the weight that we all carry around the concerns that the course was bringing to light. There's so much more to learn. I think we could turn this course into a graduate program and have plenty to continue. So moving on from the course and going very quickly, I want to tell you about two more things. One is the results of a survey I just completed on Monday. I've surveyed Notre Dame students each presidential election since 2004. 1,200 plus students completed the current survey, to which I added questions about COVID and racial justice. Let me note that Notre Dame students over the years vote fairly consistently with age cohorts at other universities nationally, which I describe in reports on the Center for Social Concerns website. Each year I asked what were the top issues that weighed in students' thinking as they voted, giving 13 possible choices. This year I added two more: response to COVID and racial justice concerns. And these two issues, not surprisingly, jumped into the top 4 factors for 2020. These are on students' minds. I also asked how closely students were following the news about COVID. Most are following with interest, though it may be interesting to learn from the almost 11% who said they were not following closely. Similarly, students are following the news about demonstrations, protesting violence against Blacks, and similar concerns. I also asked students to rate how well various groups were responding to COVID, and the university comes out quite well here. 68% say we did an excellent or a good job in responding to COVID. I wish I had more time to share with you the results of this survey, but you'll have to look at the report I'll write in the spring. Finally, I'm building on the pilot work done in the course that the students shared, etc., and other work, the survey I noted, to develop a more formal research initiative for Spring 21 and beyond. As the title of the forum suggests, what comes next in response to COVID is key. And I want to understand how our students and others are responding ethically and how their sense of purpose is evolving. If we can understand these things, like mask wearing and vaccinations, etc., attitudes toward change, will be in better position to implement some of the health practices, etc. I have way too many research questions in mind. Here are maybe 8. For instance, how may the understanding of racial justice concerns interact with pandemic challenges, etc. So it's an evolving research plan. This is a brief outline. It will be both qualitative and quantitative. And I certainly welcome collaborators from any discipline or any perspective. Faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, there's a lot to learn here, and I'm excited about this potential and what could be done to contribute through it. So first, thank you to Claudia and Caroline for your good work and for participating today. And thanks to all who are part of this. And feel free to contact me if you want more information, etc.
I'd like to add my thanks also to you, Jay and Caroline and Claudia. We've gotten a few questions in the chat, and I'll encourage you all to write in others. The first comes from Dan Graff, and it asked, Ben, are there ways that lessons from the remote SLLP experience might improve or transform the conventional SSLP where we can come when we go back to normal? Thanks,
Dan. Thanks, Pamela. Yeah, I'm encouraged by this thought of returning to normal, and as maybe the presentation said, I also hope that that we're changing, what that normal is that we return to. I hope we've learned something from this whole time. I mean, just real briefly, I don't want to get too specific into just our program, but to keep it kind of extrapolated for others who are doing diverse work across a lot of different fields. I would say for us, it has been a time, it kind of has occasioned us to reevaluate maybe what kind of priorities do we place on different kinds of things. I think in the past, we've had a real value and a preference for students doing, that direct relational sort of service. And we've tried to limit the amount that students are doing more administrative work, because they're kind of valuing those, the more relational side. And this past summer, I think has made us realize when students bring a lot of skill sets, to the work, they're new in many ways and don't have expertise, but there are some real skills that they can bring and can develop. And so for us to not be so shy for students to be able to, perform important functions for their organization. And I'd say the other thing that has really amazed me is that the way that technology can allow students to connect in an ongoing way with their organizations. So students who far after they'd completed the requirement or what they had committed to, contractually, the ways that students were really hungry to continue to be invested in that community and with that community partner. So that's something I definitely want to try to explore as well, as how students can continue to connect instead of just like they're all in over the summer and then we extract them and they're back to campus. And how do you kind of navigate these two different worlds?
Thank you. Yeah, I could see that in the future, there might be able to have longer relationships with their community service partners. Right. Over the course of maybe an academic year, maybe even starting their work prior to the in-service placement as a possibility. So our next question is open to all of the panelists, and it asked, for those of us charged with teaching, we see anxiety, stress, along with reliance and adaptation in our classrooms. What lessons might you share for integrating attention to the impacts of COVID-19 into course content that is not always immediately connected?
I'll jump in on that one. It's a great question, and I think there's both content and pedagogy. And from a pedagogical standpoint, this is a weighty time. As I noted, the heaviness of the issues it warrants us stopping and pausing and asking, where are we? Can't always be the full class period. I was lucky enough to have a course where we could talk about it the whole time. But it should be a starting point, I think. And there are plenty of references out there in the higher education literature on how to do that. But it's also relevant, as I think our earlier panelists mentioned, to the content of so many disciplines. So we take our houses perhaps for granted in the built environment, as Tracy noted, but there are COVID implications throughout, et cetera. So I think it's a matter of pausing with our own syllabi and with our own plans in the course, and addressing some of those potentials and asking students for those questions that are coming to their minds in the disciplines, because they'll be seeing those connections, etc.
Ben, would you like to respond as well?
Sure, thanks. I'm similar to Jay in that, we have the privilege in our courses of, the experience is the content in many ways of the course. So if they're wrestling with something, that's not an aside for us. So I recognize that's kind of a unique aspect. So I'd be really curious to hear from others, the expertise on the call as well, who've had to grapple with balancing those two things.
And from our students.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I was thinking that I would love to invite Caroline and Claudia to unmute themselves and to also weigh in on these questions. And I think our audience would love to hear more about your experiences, especially Claudia, your experiences with some of the community partners here in South Bend, since the majority of us on this call probably reside in the area.
Yeah, going off of that previous question, as a student, I definitely experienced a lot of stress not having breaks this past semester and just with everything going on. But one thing that I really enjoyed sometimes was to not have a class. This might be counterintuitive to the forum, but to not have a class talk about COVID and just have it be a normal class period. Sometimes it's really helpful to weigh in and ask, how are you all doing? But sometimes it's nice to just have some normalcy and say, okay, this is a hard science class and we're going to learn. And that is what we're here for. So I think there's a balance between talking about COVID and sometimes for mental health, also not talking and trying to have a little bit of normalcy in the classroom.
Definitely. And Carolyn, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with Claudia on that. I think there's a really important balance that we definitely struck in our class, even though the title does include coronavirus and what's going on right now. We started each class period where Dr. Brandenberger asked us, how are we doing? And those answers were always kind of a wide array of things, whether it be exams coming up or just the high levels of stress that we all faced. But then we always progressed into conversations about being in the classroom and how we can learn in a little bit more positive spin. And I think whether it be a class like that or something like Claudia mentioned, where it is a serious science class and you kind of go into your own world of learning and find that sense of normalcy, I think it's really important to just have compassion for each other in the classroom, and also that focus that we all, as Notre Dame students are excited to have when we do go on campus. And I hope that next semester things can continue to, get a little bit more normal, with everyone having in the back of our head that we have just gone through this. So I definitely enjoyed being asked how we're all doing and then progressing into a very productive classroom environment.
Yes, I taught a Moreau seminar this semester, and I could be a witness to the stress that was felt by many students. There was a comment in the chat which noted that Notre Dame has planned some mini breaks for next semester. So we've been a little bit more proactive and setting aside some days when both faculty, staff, and students can rest. And I think that's definitely needed given the environment that we're likely to still be facing when we return to campus in February. Another question has come in for Ben. and that is from Dan Graff, and he writes, I wonder if Ben might talk about his goals for connecting with academic departments and programs in addition to theology.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Pamela. I'll just share just real briefly one other thought from the previous thread too. I loved Jay's phrase, and he shared it with me a couple months ago, but the phrase he used this morning in the session about the teachable moment that the world is in right now. And I saw that over the summer, that I think there was a profoundly teachable moment, but I don't think it's like a self-evident sort of insight or learning that comes out of that. I think I saw that a lot of students and adults experience that the overwhelmed feeling of just the anxiety, the uncertainty. And so how to strike that balance of, like Claudia and Caroline, I really appreciate what you said, of like, if we're just constantly processing, we're going to wear ourselves out from processing. But I saw that the course that I was able to be part of, I think provided just enough kind of structure to allow students to have like an intentional way of reflecting. And so they were able to just try to make some sense out of what was going on in the world, instead of just having it be kind of this torrent, of wave after wave of the next bad news. So that might be one suggestion I would have too, is that of course, we're constantly thinking and feeling all sorts of things, but if we provide kind of disciplined ways of engaging that can actually help sometimes with the feeling of anxiety. Yeah, Dan, I appreciate your question. So the SSLP is on this kind of couple-year trajectory of trying to connect with more academic departments across campus. So Nancy Michael, I know, had posted a comment in just the previous thread. So she's in the neuroscience department, for those of you who know her. And so she and I kind of started this trend. So she and I co-teach a course for the SSLP that's neuroscience and Catholic social tradition, which don't necessarily seem like natural companions, but it's a really interesting class. And so Claudia, your point about, sometimes it's nice just to learn the science, so she brings the science side of things, and we look at how do those scientific concepts kind of get played out in real world situations. So that's just one example. We're working with other departments too. I've talked with Dan about the history department. We've been in conversations with peace studies. Jay and I are developing a course that's a psychology focused SSLP. But basically the insight behind all of this is that how to help integrate experiences, what students do and what they're part of with their intellectual formation in the classroom, and to really bring those two together. And so those really rich experiences they have over the summer, I think there's some real potency that gets that remains kind of on the table if they're not bringing that back into the kind of their normal life. That's always the hope, is that none of these experiences are just I was sort of like wince a little bit when a student says, oh, like, Ben, that was a once in a lifetime summer. I sort of think like, I certainly hope not.
Yeah, I know that we're hoping that we're going to instill in a love of learning and community and solidarity for a lifetime, and that our students will be taking this with them in all of their paths that they pursue. I see that we have another comment in which talked about the Women's Global Health course this fall, where students were also engaged in a number of conversations about COVID-19, including domestic violence, breastfeeding, and maternity. And I would invite Maria, if you'd like to unmute yourself, if you could share a little bit about that course as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I am with great honor would like to share, in the light of this conversation, a great experience that I have with my undergraduate and graduate students in my signature Global Women's Health course this fall semester. And I also had this opportunity, even though the topics of the course are determined by me as the instructor and are part of the syllabus, but it's really student-centered, oriented course. And in their time when students presented on the topics, many of those were explored through the COVID-19 lens, which enhanced students' experience in the classroom heavily. And we had many great conversations each week in the classroom. and students appreciated that opportunity that this class, like my platform and class, gave them this chance to explore these multifaceted topics, from, like I put in the chat example, like from breastfeeding, how it was affected during COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the previous speakers elucidated about that, to domestic violence, how this part of misfortunate, unhealthy practices in daily lives were affected much worse by this pandemic. So, and that was really appreciated by students, that I was able to make sure that I had this kind of my radar on to hear what is important for the students. And they appreciated that opportunities and freedom for me to give this chances for them to explore this further, and that made this year experience class quite different from the previous ones, because apparently before we never had explored any of these topics through disasters that can happen and affect us globally. So that's what I wanted kindly to share. And thank you very much, Pamela, for a chance to do so. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So we have probably time for one or two additional questions before we give you a little bit of break before the next session. So if there's any final thoughts or questions from the audience, we would be happy to entertain them.
I'm not fully the audience, but I have a question.
Our panelist, yes.
I have a question building on Ben's good work in thinking about the community partner perspective. And Notre Dame has a great history of engaging, but wanting to make sure that we do that well, and we don't stop doing it in ways that we can. So if there are any partners in the audience, any thoughts about that? Any suggestions, any recommendations? I can answer my own question in one way, and that is we have to listen well. Hugh Page in the Office of the Provost has been emphasizing that listening is our first and best way to engage right now. So I appreciate that insight. And I would also share that most of the major associations that foster engagement in higher education have tremendous resources on how to build those reciprocal partnerships during COVID with very good specificity. So if anyone's interested, I can point you in those directions.
I do see a question. How do we get our community healthcare caregivers involved? And that's for anyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do know there are quite a few good conversations going on already among hospital leaders and university representatives and agency representatives about the local specific healthcare needs posed by COVID. Heidi might be the best person to talk to here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I suspect you'd have way more insight than me.
Thanks, Jay. How do we get the providers involved is, boy, I think that's the eternal question, isn't it? They're already so far stretched, and how can we unplug them from something to replug in something new or enhance what it is that they're already doing? In my conversations with our health officers, so Dr. Fox and Dr. Einters, you know that they have united unified command, that they've established a unified command for the response to COVID, right? So our health officers are meeting with key healthcare officials in our community 3 times a week. They meet for an hour 3 times a week to discuss everything that's related to COVID-19. And what we're talking about now is, how do we continue to operationalize unified command to address other issues? So once we get to the other side of COVID, and eventually we'll get to the other side of COVID, how do we then use that apparatus to keep on going? Because amazingly, it has been a unifier for our community. We have people who are crossing party lines, who have never worked together. We have St. Joe Memorial sitting at the table talking to each other. South Bend Clinic is sitting there. And then our county commissioners, mayors, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I'm looking towards, is looking at our leadership and then start feeding them the content areas that we need to be working on and paying attention to those and diversifying what it is that they're going to be working on.
Thank you. And this next question might be one that you might have expertise in as well. Kathleen writes, I'd like to know the guidance for clinical. We have 2 adjunct faculty members who are willing to take students as soon as we say it's okay. What's our advice for faculty members who want to place students in clinical placements? And someone
I was going to say, I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer that question. I mean, at this time at Notre Dame, we're not really encouraging people to be the students to be in the field per se, correct? I think that policy is still in place. And somebody else on the call knows how we go about placing students in clinical settings. I'm not sure about that.
So I certainly don't have the expertise to answer the question with specifics, but I think you're correct in saying that the university is still on a pause at this point for clinical placements. And I know that there are members of senior leadership who are evaluating our current response to COVID-19, assessing what we did well, what we might improve on through the fall. And we'll probably get new guidance sometime during our extended winter session about what the spring will look like. So I think we're coming up close to the end of our time. I see that there's a message in the chat that I should share should share with everyone, which is that the community needs are great as is the opportunity to partner. We need to listen and provide creative solutions to help and address those.